North America, and good evening if you're joining us from Asia or elsewhere. It's a great pleasure to welcome you all to this very timely, topical, and very important webinar looking at the fight for freedom in two places where freedom is under grave threat, Burma or Myanmar and Hong Kong, two places that I personally have been deeply involved with for many years. I'm Benedict Rogers, the co-founder and chief executive of Hong Kong Watch, and it's our pleasure at Hong Kong Watch to co-host this event with our friends in Burma Campaign UK. And it's a particular privilege to welcome our very distinguished and courageous panel to help us address this topic. I'm delighted to welcome someone who's been a long-standing friend of mine, Wainin Printthorn, who's the Senior Advocacy Officer at Burma Campaign UK, Nor Wakushi from the Karen Peace Support Network, Ted Hui, who is a former pro-democracy legislator from Hong Kong, who escaped Hong Kong in December 2020, initially came to the UK, but is now joining us late at night in Australia, and Jerry Su, who is a student activist from Hong Kong and now working with Hong Kong Watch as our associate based in Washington, DC. Before I invite our speakers to set out the issues in both Burma, Myanmar, and Hong Kong, and to look at what the international community should be doing to support their fight for freedom, let me just make a few brief observations to set the scene. Burma or Myanmar and Hong Kong are very different places in many ways, but they have the following in common. Both have had limited freedom taken away from them completely in the past year. Neither place was ever a full democracy, but Burma has had a decade of some political opening and two legitimate elections, and Hong Kong had a partially directly elected legislature and until recently the protection of basic freedoms and human rights and an open society and the rule of law. Both places have, in effect, but in different ways, experienced a coup over the last year. A military coup with guns and much bloodshed in Burma or Myanmar, which overthrew a democratically elected civilian government on the 1st of February this year. But in Hong Kong, a legislative coup in which the Chinese Communist Party regime has imposed a draconian national security law last July, a sham electoral system introduced afresh this year, and the regime has dismantled Hong Kong's promised freedoms and autonomy in total breach of an international agreement, resulting in the end of the promised one country, two systems concept, and instead the total takeover of Hong Kong by Beijing. Both places have political prisoners now, and both co-host organizations, Burma Campaign UK and Hong Kong Watch, campaign for the release of political prisoners in both places. And of course, whilst both issues should be of concern to the entire international community, the United Kingdom has a historic responsibility to both places. And both have courageous, inspiring democracy movements fighting against the odds for the freedoms which we in the democratic world enjoy and which they deserve. In recent months, since the coup in Burma on the 1st of February, which was 100 days ago yesterday, the solidarity between these two movements and the milk tea alliance has grown stronger. So to help us unpack these and other aspects of this topic and to look at what we can do to support the movements in both places, we're going to go to our four speakers. We're going to focus on Burma or Myanmar first, and then hear from our two friends from Hong Kong. And so it's a privilege to hand the floor over now to our first speaker, Wainin Printthorn. Wainin, over to you.
Thank you, Ben. Thank you very much, first of all, to having me here. And it's a great opportunity, even under difficult and unfortunate circumstances. I feel very privileged to share the panel with prominent activists from Hong Kong, and great to see Matwa Kushi as well. So it's been 101 days since the coup took over the country. And every day, you know, I live in a very safe country, but every day I wake up checking the numbers of arrests and checking the numbers of people who are being killed by the military. And my fear is nothing compared to people who are living in the country and who are living with fear, not knowing when soldiers will burst into their homes, whether to arrest them or to kill them. So everyday people in Burma are living with fear. And since the coup took over on 1st of February, we saw peaceful protests across the country. But peaceful protests have been met with increased violence by the military, and there were a lot of people have been killed, and many of them were children as well. So the latest number we have, it's more than 780 people have been killed by the Burmese military. And this number doesn't include people who are being killed in ethnic areas. It's just numbers of peaceful protesters and activists who are being killed by the military. And in prison, there are more than 3,800 people. In the beginning of the coup, you could see at least you could rationalize the pattern of arrest, because they were targeting individuals who might be activists, who might be at risk for mobilizing protests. But as the days went on, the arrest was mass arrest. I mean, during the day, they will arrest anyone they see, or who, peaceful protesters, activists, but during the night they are raiding homes and arresting anyone they could find. And if they can't find the person that they wanted to arrest, they are arresting family members. In some cases, they are taking away children and wives of an activist as a leverage for them to be able to arrest an actual person. And there are many cases of torture in detention, and there are many cases of, unfortunately, death in detention as well. So I work with a lot of families of people who are being arrested. And the sad reality now is a lot of family members told me, they would prefer to have their children in prison rather than in detention center being tortured and then killed. So this shouldn't be the choice that people have to live with, but that's the sad reality on the ground. And at the moment, all the trials are being held inside prison, and some of them are allowed to have legal counsel, some of them are allowed to have lawyers, but there are no privacy between lawyers and clients to discuss what's going on and how to proceed with their cases. And under military dictatorship, the trials are just formalities, and we know almost all of them would be sentenced under, politically motivated charges. For example, one of the activists who was arrested on 1st of February, he was arrested by soldiers around 4 o'clock in the morning, and because clearly he was he was going to be a risk, and he was a student activist who could start protests, so military targeted him. But actually, when he was charged for violating vehicle safety laws. So if they couldn't find charges against those individuals, they are bringing up politically motivated and trumped charges. So just the same example with Aung San Suu Kyi. There were allegations of voter frauds, which started this whole coup mess anyway. But by the time she was charged under owning illegal walkie-talkie. So you could see the pattern of politically motivated charges. So my father is one of them. He was arrested on 1st of February, and he was gone for 2 months. We had no idea where he was being detained or how he was. And then when we found out that he was in insane prison and he was charged against, so they found an email on his phone. The email dated back to 2014. in that email, he wrote about federal democracy, how important to work for federal democracy, and he works with ethnic armed organizations, and how Burman nationalism is growing inside the country, and how we can all tackle that nationalism. But he was charged under hate speech, so which is completely against his principle and his work. So these are the patterns of arrest, if I could give a summary of it. But also on the side, there are so many problems, so we have a growing civil disobedience movement in the country, but which means it's been 3 months now, people have no income to support their families, people have no income to even, feed themselves. So the poverty, I mean, Burma was already affected by COVID before, but because of this coup, Burma is descending into poverty more and more, and we are, facing a humanitarian crisis. And teachers and doctors who are taking part in civil disobedience movements are under increased pressure to go back to work or face arrest. So if they face arrest, they will lose their license, and they will have criminal records when they come out of prison, which means they won't be able to be a doctor or a teacher or go back to work anymore. So, it may sound like all depressing, but it is depressing. But if we can, the courage and bravery of people inside the country is remarkable. Despite the killing and despite the arrests, everyone, people are going out every day to protest, and people are taking part in against the military coup movement for more than 3 months now. And most of the signs when they're protesting, most of the signs they hold are written in English because they want the international community to help. But in reality, it's really frustratingly slow to get any response from the international community. We have seen the UK and US taking stance, and the EU taking stance on sanctions against the military companies, but there are so many things that could be done. For example, we've been calling for the global arms embargo, because the weapons that military is acquiring, it should be stopped, the weapons going into the country, but the military don't need more weapons to kill people inside the country. And also there is revenues that they will get from gas, oil, timber, and gems. Those needs to be stopped, because the military won't use those revenues to build schools or hospitals or to help people. They will just be buying more weapons to oppress people inside the country. And the main thing also here is the accountability issue. The military thought they could get away with the coup because they were able to get away with the genocide against the Rohingya, and they have been able to get away with the brutality and human rights violations they committed against ethnic minorities for so long. So they have this sense of impunity in their mind that, this coup is nothing compared to what we did before, and we can get away with it. So the world at the international community has a duty to take charge and hold these military generals accountable, and it needs to go further than normal, holiday bans or SS freeze, which they don't have. And sadly, although people inside the country are, going out risking their lives, sad to see that UN Security Council has failed to do its job to protect people in the country. And rather than issuing a statement by saying we stand with people of Burma, we appreciate that, of course. What they need to do is UN Security General should go to Burma and meet with the generals to talk about the release of all political detainees, restoration of the legitimately elected government, but also to safeguard the humanitarian crisis and to cross-border aid to people in ethnic area as well. So there are so many things that they can be doing and they should be doing, rather than issuing more and more statements and saying they are concerned about the situation. And with this, crisis, what we've seen, very encouraging thing is the alliance between young people from across the nation. So we are seeing the Milk Tea Alliance and people from young people in Burma, when the protest started, they were learning from Hong Kong protest guides. So they were, those things were translated into Burmese, and they were learning how they could be creative and how they could share tactics together. So I think in terms of alliance, it's very encouraging to see, and I think it needs to be, in my opinion, it needs to be two-way. One is emotional, and the other is strategic. Emotional, as in we need to encourage each other, because it's a long journey. As I'm sure Hong Kong activists will tell us, that it's been it's been going on for a longer for you guys than we have. So I think encouragement is very important. That solidarity is there. We are not alone. We are in this together, fighting for democracy, fighting for freedom. I think it's moral support and encouragement is very important in these difficult times. And in terms of strategy, we need to be learning how we can move this movement in a sustainable way, because like I said with the civil disobedience movement, although it has been an effective tool against the military, it's taking a lot of toll on the family and a lot of toll on people inside the country who are now living in poverty. So we need to learn how we can move forward in a sustainable way, and because this movement is unfortunately going to be long. So I think there are so many tactics and strategies that we can share within, we have so many similarities as well as so many differences. So we can learn from each of them. So I think it will be good for us to discuss how we can move forward and how we can build alliances with campaigners and activists from both countries. So I will stop from here. I look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Weinin, for that very moving and comprehensive overview of the situation. And just to say, on a personal level, we all stand with you in thinking about your father and all political prisoners in Burma. So thank you very much for your contribution. Before I go to Norwakushi, just to say to our audience, when we've heard from all four speakers, we will have time for some Q&A. And I believe you can send the questions to me in the chat function, or you can send them to my colleagues at Hong Kong Watch, and they'll filter them through to me. But do start thinking about your questions, and we can try and take as many as we can when we get to that time. And also to say that we are broadcasting on Facebook Live, so we have a wider audience beyond the people who are with us on this platform. One of the things that I think is very important about the crisis in Burma is the situation for the ethnic nationalities in the country. The very courageous protest movement throughout the country since the coup has rightly received quite a lot of international attention. It still needs more international attention, but the plight of the ethnic nationalities has not received the attention that it should receive. And since the coup, we've seen airstrikes by the military in some areas, the displacement of tens of thousands of people. And so I'm really delighted to invite Norwakushi from the Karen Peace Support Network to outline the situation for the ethnic nationalities since the coup and what we can do to help. Norwakushi, over to you.
Thank you, Ben. Before I speak, I would like to let you know that even before the military coup, already 5,000 people, like Korean people, have been displaced. So for the ethnic people, the military coup is not a new thing for us, because the military there has always been military coup and military arrest in our area and ongoing human rights violations committed by the army continue even during the NLD government. And currently, the only peace park, the only Salween Peace Park, the peace park that initiated by the Korean indigenous people in Mudra district, and the only peace park from Burma the only peace park that's recognized by the UN is not currently being bombarded, and over 60,000 people that live around the areas have been displaced in the current state. Since after the coup, since March, March 27, there have been a total of 27 air attacks and 47 large bombs dropped, killed more than 20 civilians, displaced more than 3,000 people that currently fled to the border across the Salween River. And there also have been very heavily airstrikes, especially in Mudra district, and the military fired the mortars around the villages and in the farming area, and a total of 575 mortar were shells around into the villages. And the Burma, at the same time, when the villages were deserted, and the Burma army looted the villages' rice, money, motorbike, farming equipment. So since March 27, the bombing and the shelling, including mortar launched from the Burma army camps, killed at least 40 civilians in Mudra district alone, and injured more than 28, destroyed 20 houses, 2 schools, the rice field, rice supplies of 5 villages, and the 5 villages have been burnt. Currently, we received a report that the Burma army from the MOC number 8, LIB 405, killed a Bothota villager and buried him with his motorbike. And this is what happened inside. And for us, we are responding to the humanitarian, to those who are fleeing to the border, especially for the community-based organizations that are based along the border. We are responding to the humanitarian assistance, and the civilian boat that carry humanitarian supplies along the Salween River have been shot at by the Burma army. And the Burma army at Papun also laid down landmines near villages and the farmland. There has been a case of arbitrary arrest and detentions. Most of the cases and what's happening in the areas are not covered in the news and not reported due to the internet connections, weak internet connections, and also communications problems. And currently the situation's updates in Brigade 3. The offensive, the fighting is not only in Brigade 5. In Brigade 3, Klalitu district, over 2,000 people have been displaced. And in Brigade 1, Dutatu district, over 800 people have been displaced. And in Mudra district, we have a total number of more than 60,000 have been displaced. So the IDPs and refugees are on the both sides of the Thai side of the border and are in need of the food and water, shelter, medicine, sanitations, COVID-19, PPE, the clothes. The most vulnerable IDPs are pregnant and elderly women, the children, women who are injured from the fighting. And these populations are in dire of need of humanitarian aid. Apart from the IDPs, we are already busy responding to the emergency need, but at the same time, we also have to receive and provide, shelter, provide refuge for those who are fleeing from inside the city. So the number of the CDM that arrived in our area at the end of April, it's already over 3,534 people in 7 districts. So it's a lot of a burden for the those who are providing support. And without international support, the ethnic armed organizations and the community-based organizations will not be able to provide support to receive more people from the cities. And the call for the KPSN call for the actions, we ask the government and citizens around the world to denounce the coup and refuse to recognize the military regime as a legitimate governing body of Burma, and to suspend all political and financial support, to impose targeted economic sanctions to the military-owned, military-controlled companies, and to support the call for an international arms embargo. I will also ask you to take a step to advocate your own government never to engage again with the Burmese military, not to give them funding nor training ever again. The Burmese military must stop offensive against its own people throughout the country, pull back its troops from our land, and immediately release all political prisoners. So our last call is we ask all the donors, the citizens, to provide a flexible support to those who are able to provide humanitarian aid to the IDP. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Norwakushi, for that very informative and disturbing picture. Of course, I've worked on Burma's borders with the ethnic nationalities for many years. So, as you said rightly, the coup, in a sense, is nothing new for the ethnic nationalities, but of course, it has resulted in an intensification of the offensive. So, thank you for sharing that perspective. We've heard those two perspectives from Burma or Myanmar. We're going to go now to our two speakers on Hong Kong, and it's a pleasure to welcome, first of all, Ted Hui, who, as I said earlier, is a former legislator. Of course, many of your colleagues, Ted, are now in prison in Hong Kong. Thankfully, you're safely out of Hong Kong, but over to you to present your perspectives on these issues.
Thank you, Ben, for having me here. And it's a great time for me to talk about Hong Kong in face of all the persecutions that we face. But I also speak with a very heavy heart for seeing all my comrades being in jail, seeing all the Burmese killed. And every day I watch the news, my heart's heavy, my heart's broken. I believe the Burmese people feel the same. So like people in Burma, people from Hong Kong are counting the days since we lost our freedoms, counting how many friends and family, loved ones we've lost. And for Hong Kong situations, our fight started 2 years ago. So it's been 2 years and we are not seeing any way out, at least from now. So it will be a long struggle. So when Ben introduced Hong Kong situation as a coup, a legislative coup, I think he's not exaggerating at all, because even in Hong Kong situations, it's not like a government run by military forces, but still there are serious human rights abuses happening in Hong Kong, and all of basic fundamental rights, democratic rights, being a human, are gone. And of course, the regimes has broken all the promises made to us, and which is the basis of how Hong Kong is run and how we trusted the regime all of the past years, not to mention breaking all the international treaties and norms and international obligations. So even though it's not a coup by force, but definitely it's not a coup by military forces, but it's a rule by force, by violence in Hong Kong situation, by systemic violence. So since 2019, there have been brutal crackdowns by the police in Hong Kong, and it lasts till 2020. So in Hong Kong now, I would say simply there's a speech ban, banning people from speaking against the government. The national security law is in place, and the consequences of us speaking freely and marching freely in the streets is jail time for decades and of perhaps lifetime. And there are also all the public assemblies, street demonstrations are banned, and there have been like in Burma, there have been arrests of all the opposition leaders, political party leaders, activists, and now the Hong Kong regime has set up a standard and calling those people who are loyal to Beijing as patriots. And now the standard is that only patriots can run Hong Kong. So also by changing the electoral systems and eliminating all the pro-democracy leaders and activists from running in public elections at all. So I believe that in the regime's eyes, those who speak against the government, those who oppose the government, those who hold any dissent are unpatriotic, and now they're eliminated by being thrown to jails, by being thrown overseas, people in exile like me. So more than that, in Hong Kong, there are systematic crackdowns also on media, and journalists are being criminally prosecuted, teachers are being disqualified, and of course, not like in Burma, the Hong Kong regimes in a so-called modern city now is playing civilized, using the judicial systems, using the laws, using the banking systems to free people's dissidents' assets, and banning organizations from running, changing school curriculums, etc. So I personally have empathy over Burma a lot, seeing all the pictures of riot police, the military police dispersing people, people fighting bravely, people running, people getting hurt, people in face of tear gas, water cannons, rubber bullets, and live rounds. I've been there. It feels like I've been participating in frontline protests, so I feel the pain of the young people being hurt, being taken away. Even though in Hong Kong situations it's not as deadly, but it's very similar. Like, for example, you mentioned just now how the police would do morning raids and night raids and knock on your door or break in your door in the middle of the night. Hong Kong police are doing exactly the same thing. So also have empathy because once we had some degree of freedom, some degree of democracy in Hong Kong, and one being able to take part in public elections and make changes from inside the system. We once had half democratic elections. Now these are gone. Not only the systems, but the people are gone, our comrades, our freedom fighters. So yeah, from the Hong Kong's point of view, of course, as I'm overseas, I advocate for all different kinds of sanctions, personal targeted sanctions, economic sanctions against those human rights abusers. And of course, I advocate LIFO plans so that those in danger can leave the country safely. And also very similar to what the other Burmese guest has spoken, all the economic reliance, partnerships should be cut at all, because after all these human rights abuses, after all these brutal crackdowns, after all those lives been lost, it's very, very hard for me to observe that some countries are still doing business with China, with the Burmese military government, as if nothing has happened, as if business as usual. It's very, very hard for me to accept that. It's immoral. So, of course, there are more things people can do. Those who are persecuted in Burma, in Hong Kong, can collaborate, can get together and be more connected, and to spread the message out. And the message is that it's not, for example, China, the CCP has not done wrong and the unforgivable in Hong Kong, but in the world, look at what's going on in Burma, and the root, part of the root of the problem is from China, is from the Chinese government, how they are supporting the coup, and how they are allowing all that to happen to Burmese peoples in silence. So so it's not separate issues. Human rights issues are the same issues, and we are facing one dictators and human rights abusers that is doing wrong things and human rights abuses all over the world. So I believe together we are stronger. So I hope that we can be joining hands more and spread the message out so the international communities can hear us. I'll just stop here, and so any questions for me is welcome.
Thank you so much, Ted, for that very moving analysis of the situation in Hong Kong and that message about the importance of this being the same cause wherever it is taking place, whether it's Burma or Hong Kong, and the need to stand together. It's a great pleasure now to go to our fourth speaker, my colleague and student activist from Hong Kong, speaking to us from Washington, D.C. now, Joey Su. Joey.
Thank you, Ben, and thank you, everyone. You guys are very, very courageous and have always been not only the people in Hong Kong and Burma, but then also for the other people who are also fighting to defend our core and also common values across the globe. So my name is Joey, and I was a student activist from Hong Kong. I was actually nominated as the vice president of my student union at my university right few days before the movement in Hong Kong broke out in 2019. And very accidentally, I became a student activist under public eyes and started organizing different grassroots campaigns, including sharings, class boycott in campus, and also protests and rallies in the city. And I have also founded a student coalition focusing on international advocacy for Hong Kong in 2019. And because of the implementation of the national security legislation and also the risk following the legislation, I was forced to leave my homeland in 2020, and I'm currently based in Washington, D.C., working with Hong Kong Watch. So when we look at the situations in Burma, I myself see a lot of similarities and also a lot of parallels where we see so many of our people, so many of our everyday citizens turn into accidental activists, not because that they are interested in not because that they're interested in politics or social issues, but then really because that their personal safety and also well-being are being put at risk, where their families and also friends or people they know are being kidnapped or being killed by the police force and the military in Burma. We see so many of our people being forced into activism overnight. They were forced to pick up the very heavy responsibilities of fighting for our freedom, democracy, or very, very fundamental human rights, and also to devote themselves very suddenly to sacrifice everything they have to protect our homeland and also to protect our people. And we understand that the kind of determination and also courage of our people is an inspiration to many, many people in Hong Kong, in Burma, and also in other countries across the globe. So when we look at the situations in Burma and in Hong Kong, we see that the control of our homelands are being taken over completely by dictators in a very brutal and also in a very violent way. We're described as Ben that in Burma we see a military coup happening, and in Hong Kong we see a coup happening in our legislative council being executed by the Chinese Communist Party. And in both places, we see that the freedom of expression, the freedom to participate in rallies, protests, the freedom to voice out our political views or stances no longer exists. We see that the fundamental rights are being stripped off from our people, where when they are arrested, they were often denied the access and also rights to legal assistance, where we see that the fundamental rights to participate in different kinds of political assemblies are being ripped off from us. And then we are also seeing our first aid responders or even journalists and then also other people in Hong Kong are under escalating pressure from the Chinese Communist Party and also from officials in Beijing. The political persecution goes more and more serious in both places, where almost, for example, in Hong Kong, with the implementation of the national security legislation, almost all of our prominent activists and leaders are now in jail or in exile because of their participation in democratic primaries organized by several civil organizations. They are now being charged with subversion of state and then facing a potential imprisonment of up to 10 years or more, and then also the possibility of being extradited to mainland China. And aside from all these arrests of prominent activists and leaders. We're also seeing our everyday protesters and Hong Kongers under the risk of being charged under several draconian legislations, including the national security legislation and also the public order ordinance. They are facing a potential charge and also imprisonment under different very serious criminal offenses, including rioting, illegal assemblies, simply because of their participation in very absolutely peaceful protests happening in Hong Kong since 2019. And aside from all these arrests and also oppressions on the surface executed by the Chinese Communist Party, we also struggle from the behind-the-scene dirty work done by the Chinese Communist Party in Hong Kong, actually in Burma as well. Tracing back to the time before our movements broke out, the Chinese Communist Party have already been penetrating into our societies, slowly taking control over our economy and also different industries, as well as different aspects of our communities and also society, where they have been trying to take control over different industries. They have been trying to penetrate and then to infiltrate into different civil organizations, civil bodies in our homelands, and that is getting worse and worse after our movement broke out. For example, after the coup in Burma happened, we see that the Chinese Communist Party backing the military. They have been supporting the military with different weapons and resources. They have been blocking international actions taken that might be possible by different international bodies. And in Hong Kong, that is very, very similar, where we see the Chinese Communist Party backed police forces in Hong Kong making unreasonable arrests, committing different kinds of police brutality without having to face the responsibility. And then we are also seeing that after the implementation of the national security legislation in July 2020, thousands of national security agents were being sent by Beijing to Hong Kong for a larger scale surveillance and also monitoring in our place. And they have also been encouraging the people in Hong Kong to rat on each other, to monitor and then to report each other. And with all the plight of the people in Hong Kong and also with the people in Burma, we are also suffering from the inefficiency of international bodies, where, I mean, of course, we appreciate the statements and also the very encouraging words given and also published by international bodies, by different governments, but then we do not see strong enough actions taken by different governments in the free world and also by the international bodies. We saw several rounds of sanctions imposed against the Burmese military. We have saw several rounds of sanctions imposed on Chinese and also Hong Kong officials that have been involved in committing human rights violations in our places. But then the actions are not enough, and the Chinese Communist Party has been a very, very strong factor behind that. And to go forward, it would definitely be very helpful that the people in Hong Kong and also the people in Burma collaborate and then to work together in terms of pushing forward stronger international sanctions or other international collaborative actions from international bodies and also governments. And then I believe that to work together, we can definitely urge all these international bodies and also governments to translate their statements and also the words into really collective and also concrete actions, including a stronger sanction, including appointment of special envoys to conduct independent investigations, and then also, more importantly, a complete boycott of the Burmese military as well as the Chinese Communist Party or any other human rights abuses that have been involved in the oppression of our people and also the brutal suppression of our fundamental rights and also freedoms. And aside from pushing forward a response from governments or international bodies, I think it is also very important that our civil society work together, because with the worsening situations in Hong Kong and Burma, we see that our people on the ground are living under escalating fear and also pressure. And at the same time, it is also getting more and more difficult for our friends and also family and then the other people on the ground to be in touch with the outside world and then to receive our support no matter in words or in other possible ways. So I felt like to alleviate the situation or to move forward together, we can definitely discuss how do we support the people on the ground. For example, with the assistance of technology, is it possible for us to convey our encouragements and also motivations? Or in other possible ways, are we going to be possible to transport or to provide any resources to the people in Burma who are suffering from the possible poverty or the possible hunger because of the military? Possible for us to provide any assistance to the people in Hong Kong who are gradually going to be blocked from receiving information or news from the outside world. So I think this is definitely something that both our civil society and activists from Hong Kong and also activists from the Burmese community can work together on. And then aside from all these assistance to the people on ground, with the situation going worse, we are seeing more and more people from Hong Kong and also from Burma having to leave our homelands and then to seek the opportunity of a relocation in other countries. So I think with the situation and also with an increasing number of refugees and also with activists in exile from our communities, it is definitely worth thinking that how can we help establish and then to build our diaspora communities, and then in what ways can we help these diaspora communities to continue our movement overseas? For example, what can be done to sustain our movement, for example, with different rallies, protests, and how can we sustain and build our community stronger and in policy advocacy, and then in all the other possible ways of sustaining our movement. And aside from all these, I felt like it is also very important that we continue to work together and then to shine a light on the political prisoners in both Hong Kong and also Burma, because with the escalating situation, with the escalating pressure and also fear, it is going to be more and more difficult for them to be in prison, to be living under the kind of fear imposed by the Chinese Communist Party and also the Burmese military. And also with the ongoing arrest and also persecution, there will be more and more political prisoners detained and also kept in our homelands and not being able to leave the homeland. So it will also be very, very crucial for us to continue our campaigns on political prisoners and then to encourage the international community to continue to pay attention to them. So I thank you very much for the opportunity, and I look forward to your questions and also to discussions on how can we continue to work together.
Thank you very much, Joey, for setting out such a really helpful range of things that we could be doing for both situations. We have about 10 minutes for questions, and I've received a number of questions in the chat function. For some of the questions, I will direct them just to individual speakers rather than ask all speakers to comment. There are some questions that are particularly relevant to particular speakers. But let me start with a question for all four of you, just to comment on, and if you could be as brief as possible, that will enable us to get through the other questions. A question that builds on what you've said on the issue of sanctions, but broadens it a little bit, looking at the responsibility of businesses to uphold human rights. What steps do you think that investors can take to ensure that they're not funding those responsible for human rights abuses? Governments can and should introduce targeted sanctions, as we've discussed. But what do you think is the broader role for businesses? And that any of you can, well, hopefully all of you can comment on that, and any of you can start. Who would like to begin with that? Winian, do you want to take that up first? Because I know Burma Campaign has the dirty list, so maybe you could say something about that.
Yes, I think businesses play a huge role here. Like I was saying before, the revenues that the Burmese military, now that they control the government, they will get revenues from oil, gas, timber, and gems. Those needs to be stopped, but because they will be using those revenues to commit more human rights violations. So even when we had the reform process in the last 10 years, human rights violations continue in ethnic areas, and the investment continued to come in, and the Chinese investment as well, despite the warnings of environmental violations and human rights violations for building dams in ethnic areas and forcing ethnic people out of their home. These investments continue to happen. So now that the military coup is happening, the human rights violations continue going on the ground. There is no guarantee that the business, when they invest in the country, is not ethical. I think that's the bottom line. And we need to tackle the root causes of the problem, which is the military dictatorship, military taking control of the country. As long as the military is there, I don't think business can have an ethical or a purely, helping people, investment in the country. So, businesses in the UK should stop doing business with the military-owned companies and military in Burma. And of course, China has its own self-interest as well. China is selling its veto power from the Security Council to get cheap assets to the natural resources in Burma. And I think China needs to start seeing what's happening inside the country as not an internal issue, but it's the issue that will impact on China as its economy and also its border region as well in terms of safety. And if we don't have stability in the country, then China's self-interest of economic self-interest will not be safeguarded either. And of course, don't talk about dialogue, because we can never have the dialogue with the military who is committing human rights violation. We've tried that 10 years ago, and look at where we are now. So the Burmese military is not interested in dialogue, and they're doing whatever they are doing because they know they can get away with it. So we need to stop this impunity. So, just to reiterate what we said before: sanctions, accountability, global arms embargo. So those are the three key points that we need to be doing.
Thank you, Wei Nin. Ted or Joey, do you want to comment from a Hong Kong perspective?
Yes, Ben. In Hong Kong, business play a crucial role too, and of course, after the freedom movement in Hong Kong people has created a term, yellow economy. Yellow is the color of the protest. So it's a campaign that Hong Kongers support only those businesses, industries, and shops who support freedom movements and who do not rely on the China market and those who does not support the police brutality. They boycott them. So I think it might not be a perfect model. It might not hurt those Beijing-friendly, police-friendly businesses a lot, but it is slowly doing some impact locally. I believe that there should be an international version of these kinds of yellow economies. Of course, some are already doing it, as we see in the questions in fashions, and there are boycotts for those products made in the process of which are using forced labor, human rights violations in China. So naming and shaming those brands and products and giving them pressures, and for free world and Western countries insert moral standards, ESG standards, and for those businesses, and keep people and industries alert of social values and human rights issues behind a particular product, and do boycotting, at least from the people, and make it known that the brands are doing business as usual with a human rights violator. And I believe continuing spreading this message is important, and at least we are not hurting it so that it will die down immediately, but at least we are forming a broader picture internationally that free world, free nations are joining hands together, and industries who cares about human rights and freedoms of people are joining hands together. I believe it sends a signal to human rights violators in Burma, and of course in the super power like Beijing, that it will not benefit in the long run if it continues to run the dictatorships and it continue as a tyranny. It will not benefit from its allies. It will have no allies, and it will shut itself down. It's isolating itself, and it will not be sustainable. And I believe in the long run, perhaps it can work. We don't know for sure, but it's worth a try.
Thank you, Ted. Joey, do you want to add anything briefly to that? And then we'll go to probably one final question.
So we have seen several rounds of sanctions imposed on individuals from the Burmese military and also from the Chinese Communist Party and also from the Hong Kong government. But then we do not see any very significant sanctions imposed on financial entities and also on these companies that have been assisting the human rights violations in Hong Kong or in Burma yet. And it is very, very important for governments of the free world and also for international bodies to take concrete actions and then to impose sanctions on these and also on these enterprises, because it is very important that we have to convey a message to not only the Chinese Communist Party or the Burmese military, but then also to all the enterprises across the globe that China or the Burmese military cannot apply one set of principle in their places and then apply another set of principle in the free world. And it is not going to be allowed by the international community that they, on one hand, take interest of the financial markets and also from the economic markets of the free world, but then on the other hand, go on with the assistance to the human rights violation, with the human rights abuses in the Chinese Communist Party or in the Burmese military. And it's very important that we send this message in a very, very clear and also strong way that it is not going to be allowed by the international community that the CCP or the Burmese military continue to disrespect and also to try to destroy our international rule-based order, and then also to continue to be benefited from all these human rights abuses. I think a very, very clear message has to be sent in a very strong and also in a very immediate way by all these governments and also international bodies right away.
Thank you, Joey. We are almost out of time, unfortunately. So I'm going to ask, instead of doing what I said earlier, which is to direct questions to individuals, I'm actually going to ask all our speakers to address this, and this will have to be our last question. I think it does look as if we've lost Norwakushi, unfortunately. I can't see her with us. So, but Joey, Ted, and Wei-Nin, you mentioned earlier the Chinese veto power at the UN Security Council, and a question came in about how much can the UN and particularly the Security Council do in either situation of Burma or Hong Kong, given the dominance and influence that China has. What are your thoughts, all three of you, and then we'll conclude.
Of course, you know, this bloc with the China and Russia has always been used as an argument for not moving forward with tangible action by the UN Security Council. But each individual and nations have an opportunity to work with like-minded country to, for example, things like, you know, global coalitions of countries imposing arms embargo. These nations can work with like-minded nations to create these global coalitions, because I think around 150 countries around the world have no policy on banning or arms embargo. So these countries can work together to create these global coalitions, and then that will surpass the, you know, China blockage at the UN Security Council. And one things like justice and accountability issue, also countries like the UK and US can take the lead, and other like-minded nations will follow. So of course there are blockages there, but it can't be used as an argument over and over and again to stop imposing a tangible action on Burma and Burmese military. And for things like economic smart targeted economic sanctions, there are many more things that can be done by the UK and US as well, and they can businesses should stop making alliance and stop making business with the Burmese military. That's one way to start. So there are many things that can be done rather than saying, oh, we can't do it because China is blocking it and Russia is blocking it. So, and if we work together, we can find a way, like, if we as a democracy activists can form an alliance, all these nations with powerful leaders, they can form an alliance to take action as well. So I believe in that.
Thank you, Wayne. And Joey or Ted?
Yeah, I believe, of course, we cannot be over optimistic with the UN mechanisms, given China's huge influence in it. But still, I would say that we should not give up on that, because UN is not only about politics, and it's not only about our motions and resolutions. It's also about culture. It's also about resources. So we keep using the UN platform as a international platform for exposing the human rights abuses, for exposing the crimes the military government and Beijing is committing. And we keep INGOs, we keep the international civil societies, the people being heard in the institutions. And so we deployed mechanisms like special envoys, rapporteurs, and I believe those are still useful as leverage. So it's one platform that we need to utilize. So I would say I would not give up on that.
Thank you, Ted. And Joey, the last words from you.
I would say even without the United Nations or any other existing international bodies, I still believe that the international community, especially countries of the Third World, and especially countries who have the power to impose sanctions and to counter the challenges and also threats posed by the Chinese Communist Party, will still be able to make collective actions together, and then to impose coordinated sanctions, and then to come up with a comprehensive strategy to deal with the Chinese Communist Party, and also to counter the human rights violations committed by the Burmese military. Even without any international bodies, I still believe that our countries would be able to do so, and I encourage our countries to take an action, and then to really take a step forward to think of and then to take actions regarding these collective policies and also sanctions that could be done and to impose even without the United Nations. And I would say the inefficiency on tackling and then to respond to the military coup in Burma, and also to the ongoing crackdown on freedom and also democracy in Hong Kong, is a clear reflection of the inefficiency of the United Nations and also of the other international bodies. And I believe this is going to be an issue that we, the activists from Hong Kong and also from Burma and then from other places, can continue to work on.
Thank you very much, Joey. Well, regrettably, we've come to the end of our time. I'm sorry to our audience that we weren't able to get through more questions, but these are issues that are not going to go away, and an hour is never going to be enough to do more than scratch the surface. But we will certainly be continuing our work on both situations on the fight for freedom, and very happy to hear from any of our audience privately. If there are questions that you had that we didn't get a chance to get to, by all means send them to us at Hong Kong Watch and we can find a way to respond to them. Before I conclude and thank our speakers, let me just say that this has been, for me personally, a very moving event to host and moderate, because these two places have been a big part of my own life personally for many, many years. I lived in Hong Kong for the first 5 years after the handover. It was actually while I was in Hong Kong that I began my involvement in Burma, and I've visited Burma and its borders more than 50 times. And I have the dubious distinction of having been deported from both places, from Burma and from Hong Kong. Thankfully, not from anywhere else, but from those two particular places. So they come together for me in a particularly personal way. But the issues that we've been exploring are of profound global importance. And I want to say to you all that the idea behind this webinar was not simply to have a good discussion and strengthen some relationships. We do want some concrete outcomes to come from this. I think a number of ideas have been mentioned by our speakers that are definitely worth following up on. And one of the things we plan to do is for Hong Kong Watch and Burma Campaign UK to work together on a policy paper, because there are quite a lot of policy recommendations that apply to both places that the British government and other governments are not yet undertaking. And I think we can collaborate in presenting some ideas together. But I hope also that the movements of Hong Kongers and people from Burma, which are already so intertwined and so close, can strengthen further their relationships, and at a grassroots activist campaigning level across the world, we can really strengthen that alliance, whether it's a milk tea alliance or in other forms. So it just leaves me to firstly thank our audience very much for joining us, both on this platform and those who've been watching through Facebook Live. A recording of this should be on our Facebook page, so do tell others who may have missed it if they want to follow a recording later. And finally, a very big thank you to Nor Wakushi, who sadly I think isn't with us anymore, but in her absence. And a very big thank you to Weinin Puinthon, Ted Hui, and Jerry Su. Thank you so much for your courage, for being with us today, and for all the ideas and analysis that you've shared with us. With that, I think this concludes our webinar. So thank you all very much for being with us, and we'll be in touch. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.